Bots are swimming around in the TraceTogether app. More details coming up on its latest upgrade. Quarantine-free travel no more as a VTL country. Denmark imposes curbs on travellers from Singapore. Up and away, Sentosa's latest attraction offers an unobstructed view of the southern islands. You're watching The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quay. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. When you check in somewhere with your TraceTogether app, how many of you have been in this situation? First, you have to show venue staff that you've properly checked in, and then you have to tap back to the home screen to show them your vaccination status. Quite a hassle, right? Well, in an upgrade rolled out today, the check-in screen now looks like this. Not only does it show that you've checked in, but the green background also indicates that you're vaccinated or have cleared any test status checks, so making both entry and vaccination status more visible. As for the animated otter, it's to ensure that a user isn't showing a screen grab. Those who are not eligible to enter a venue, like if they're unvaccinated, will have a white background instead. These white passes will also appear for a group check-in. GovTech's Jason Bay sharing more on the feedback gathered that prompted them to simplify the app.
We're very aware that TraceTogether, the app, right, has about 5 million users. The impact, small changes in the user experience have an outsized impact on ordinary Singaporeans. So that's something we take very seriously, right? And we've continually conducted user research and testing to improve users' experience along the way. So whether it's using the app to smoothen safe entry checks, providing the vaccination and test status displays in the app itself earlier this year, alerting users of lower risk exposures when we were in the COVID-0 phase, all of those things, right? So when the previous MTF announcement was made in October, and before that, when the policy change was decided, I think it's when we started work on this feature. And I think it was clear to the teams, whether on the policy, the operations, or the tech side of the house, that with the expanded implementation of the vaccination differentiated, safe management measures, we need to start thinking about how to change the way vaccination and test status would be displayed. And along the way, we've also continually done ground observation, feedback, taken in feedback from the public, and I think this is probably in the life of the product, the most sought after feature. We've had a lot of feedback, and I think we can see with our own eyes, as we make our way around Singapore, different malls, that indeed there are ways that we can improve that experience. So with some of our previous features, we tried to humanize the product along the way. And I think some of those insights basically made it into this particular product feature. And it's taken a while to roll it out. We do seek people's patience and understanding. But I think we're quite happy with what we've landed today. And we hope that this will significantly improve the user experience for users. It's just one of a long string of product improvements that we've made, and I think we'll continue to make. And we appreciate the feedback and the encouragement that we've gotten from our users all throughout this journey.
Travellers from Singapore will now have to serve quarantine if they're going to Denmark. Denmark, if you recall, is on our vaccinated travel lane scheme. Well, this comes after the European Union removed Singapore from a list of countries where travellers are exempt from EU travel restrictions. Posting on Facebook, the Embassy of Denmark in Singapore said Singapore was, quote, now considered a high-risk country for travel to Europe. With the exception of certain groups like Danish citizens, all travellers from Singapore must be tested upon arrival and self-isolate for 10 days. If a negative PCR test result is produced, the quarantine will end on the 4th day. Let's discuss this with journalist Toh Ting Wei. Ting Wei, why was Singapore removed from the European list? Why was it, reclassified? Why is Singapore seen as a high-risk country despite having 85% of our eligible population fully vaccinated?
Yeah, so the timing of this came as a bit of a surprise to me personally because the list has been updated every 2 weeks. And as we would know, for the cases in Singapore, it has been improving in the past 2 weeks. Before that, maybe 1 month before this, and in the last 6 weeks before this, I think the cases were rising. We hit a record high of number of cases and such. So during that point, at the last review on October 28th, the EU Council has still deemed Singapore to be a safe country in terms of whether to lift border restrictions or not. So on the review that was announced this Tuesday, Singapore disappeared from the list for countries which border restrictions should be lifted. So regarding the specific details, like they don't really announce which criteria that Singapore or any other country for that matter has breached when they are removed off the list. But based off their website, there's kind of a general set of criteria to show what they consider when determining whether countries should be on the list or off. So one example is how there should be not more than 75 new COVID cases per 100,000 people in that country over the last 14 days. Or another one is having a stable or a decreasing trend of new cases, like in these 14 days compared to the previous 14 days. So there are also other requirements like how many tests the country conducts, the vaccination rate and such. So even though Singapore does have a high vaccination rate, one of the highest in the world, I think the other factors that EU consider might have weighed it down. But looking at the timing of the announcement, I suspect it might be a case of them looking at maybe kind of a more dated set of data, maybe like 1 month before or something like that. So it could well be possible that Singapore might be added onto the list again in a matter of a month or so. But then again, that's quite speculative. So we can only wait to see what the EU Council announces in its subsequent reviews 2 weeks from now.
I see. Then Ting Wei, what is the impact of this development on the 8 vaccinated travel lanes that Singapore already has with EU member states?
Yeah, so for the impact on the vaccinated travel lanes, there won't be any impact on the vaccinated travel lane itself per se, because vaccinated travel lanes are unilateral moves by Singapore generally, as with the EU countries. So when Singapore announced and started vaccinated travel lanes with the European countries, there are 10 in total now, 8 of them are in the EU. It was a unilateral move. These countries, all of these 10 countries, they were already open to Singapore, and then Singapore announced the vaccinated travel lanes with them. So for the lanes itself, I don't think it might have an impact immediately as long as the cases in these countries don't spike too much. But in terms of general two-way quarantine-free travel, there will definitely be an impact, because what the VTLs do is they give Singapore residents like a way to come back into Singapore without quarantine. But to go to the other countries, you kind of like need them to open up to you as well to enjoy quarantine-free travel. So for example, in the case of Denmark, they have announced, like the embassy has announced today, that Singapore will now be classified as a high-risk country. And I'm guessing that they took reference from the EU's recommendation. So with Singapore being classified as a high-risk country in terms of COVID-19 infection risk, it means that a Singapore resident flying over to Denmark will now have to be quarantined for 10 days, regardless of whether you are vaccinated or not, because they don't recognize Singapore's vaccination certificate at the moment yet. But this 10-day quarantine at least can be shortened to 4 days. If you you have the option to take a PCR test on the 4th day, and if you are negative, your quarantine period will be shortened. So quarantine is one way in which the kind of like your travel journey can be affected if you are traveling to these European countries. And other kind of ways in which you could be like a traveler going there could be affected would be in terms of maybe having to have additional testing requirement. Like for the Netherlands now, from Saturday they'll require Singaporeans going there to be able to like test negative in a pre-departure test before flying over. And there could also be additional like maybe registration for contact tracing. I think for Germany, there's already some new requirement as well for some kind of forms that Singapore residents will need to fill. And lastly, there could also be some more additional requirements in terms of vaccination. Because for Germany as well, if I remember correctly, for Sinovac, it might not be recognized by them at the moment. So with Singapore being deemed as a higher risk country, I think like it might affect those taking vaccines that are like Sinovac or Sinopharm, which are not as recognized in Europe.
Well, Ting Wei, thank you so much for explaining all of that today. That was Toh Ting Wei, journalist for the Straits Times. You can read his full story at straitstimes.com. Singapore has opened up to 16 countries so far, and since September, more than 36,000 short-term visitors and long-term pass holders have gotten the green light to enter under the VTL scheme. The Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore released figures yesterday showing particularly strong interest in the newer VTLs with South Korea and Australia. As Singapore and Malaysia get ready to reopen air travel later this month, many of us are wondering just when we can cross the border again by land. Malaysia's High Commissioner to Singapore says that could happen soon, but not before minor issues like health testing regimes and cross-border processes are ironed out. And a controlled opening is likely for a start. It means the number of daily commuters will be lower than pre-COVID-19 times. Following up on last month's announcement of a new prime location public housing model. In an interview with Money FM 89.3 this morning, Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Indrani Raja, says that while different areas in Singapore could be considered prime, the government is focusing first on locales that, quote, everybody readily recognizes as a prime area.
What actually constitutes a prime location? And I don't know, just for the trying my luck here, are we looking at other prime locations in the future already?
There will be various prime locations. I mean, it's a bit like an elephant, you can describe it, but it's very difficult to pinpoint every single detail. Yeah, until you see it, right? You can describe the different parts. But I think that for prime locations, a good example will be like if you talk about the Greater Southern Waterfront, for example.
Okay.
That's prime because it's near the sea, it's central, access to facilities, etc. So we'll have to. We didn't want to hard code it right at the very beginning, and over time, different areas may become prime.
Okay.
But so what we're doing now is focusing on the areas which everybody readily recognize as a prime area, and we'll announce as and when.
In other local news, a fire broke out on the 9th floor of an HDB flat at Block 94 Pipit Road last night, caused by a power-assisted bicycle being charged along the corridor. SCDF said 90 residents from nearby units were evacuated as a precautionary measure. While there were no casualties, 2 people were examined for breathing difficulties. Planning to end the year on a high. Come December the 15th, Sky Helix Sentosa, Singapore's newest and highest attraction, opens to the public. Soar to great heights literally on the open-air rotating gondola that will raise you 35 meters above ground. Mount Faber Leisure is launching the highest panoramic ride in Singapore ahead of schedule and in time for the school holidays and year-end festivities. Before I go, a quick check-in with my colleagues at Life. 2 of Singapore's latest VTL countries, Finland and Sweden. And our travel correspondent, Clara Locke, is lucky enough to have been to both. And she's here to recommend some activities. So Clara, let's start off with Finland. What are some of the best things that one can do over there?
For me in Finland, it was getting out of the city and heading into, some of the smaller parts. So I went to Rovaniemi, which is a small town in the north, and it's on the cusp of the Arctic Circle. So if you go at this time of year or you're going for the holiday season, you'll see all these wintry landscapes. Like you can go husky sledding and get up close to these dogs that are so cute and so intelligent. And then you can also meet some reindeer and learn about these animals that are so integral to life in this part of the world. So I learned from reindeer herders about how all parts of the animal are used, like the skin is used for warmth, and then of course they eat the meat, and then they turn the milk into cheese or butter, and then they use the antlers to make craft like jewelry or knife handles. And it's just really fascinating to learn about this animal because, here in Singapore, we always see reindeer as kind of this magical creature, right? Like they pull Santa Claus sleigh and they're this fairy tale creature. And so to see them up close, to like pet them and hand feed them, it really felt like a dream come true.
So you've described a very interesting reindeer experience in Finland. But Clara, what are some of the most unique things that I can do in neighboring Sweden?
So if you're going to Sweden, you'll be flying to Stockholm. And one really memorable place in Stockholm for me is Vasa Museum. So this is a museum that's built around a reconstructed 17th century warship. And this ship has a crazy story. So basically it was the flagship of the Royal Swedish Navy and it was their pride and joy. So it set sail on its maiden voyage. But because the ship was not built well, the center of gravity was too high. Like a kilometer or so into the voyage, while it was still in Stockholm Harbour, there was a light gust of wind that came and it blew the ship and the ship toppled and it sank. Like it just went down. People died. But because the waters in that part of the world are so cold and also because of the salinity, the ship was actually quite well preserved underwater. And about 3 centuries later, it was dredged up and reconstructed. And today you can see that ship in this museum. It's huge. It's like over multiple stories, and you can see how it was put back together. You can see how it was so well preserved, and learn the stories of how the ship came to be and the people, surrounding this great, bizarre, and catastrophic project. But besides the capital city, I think it was also nice to get out of Stockholm and see some of the smaller cities. So I went to Malmö, which has a completely different vibe. It's a lot more laid back and it's just a smaller city kind of vibe. And I went to the Disgusting Food Museum there, which is this museum that curates, I guess, exotic food from around the world that people might find like disgusting. But it challenges the idea of what is disgusting, because is this cultural? Is this something we learn? So you see how people eat bugs in Africa because the bugs are really high in protein and they are so plentiful. And then you learn about like really strong, super fermented, funky cheeses from various parts of Europe, and even century egg, which is like what we get in Singapore. And then at the end of the museum, you wind up at this tasting bar where you can sample various cuisines or delicacies from around the world. And if you're a foodie like me, then it's great because you get to try all this weird and funky stuff that you probably wouldn't order off a menu. So that was a really quirky museum. But I think what was memorable for me about that town or that city was just experiencing life, day-to-day life, like taking public transport and going to the supermarket and grocery store, just in a different environment from Singapore. And I think these are the elements that we miss about travel. So I hope in the months to come that more people will get out of the country and experience this for themselves.
Well, I still haven't made any plans to travel on the VTLs yet, so for now, I'll stick to your travel stories. Clara, thank you so much for coming on the show. Famous seafood restaurant No Signboard Seafood is branching out with a self-service concept specializing in Shanghai pan-fried buns. The first outlet opened at North Point City in September and has been drawing a stream of customers. And who better to tell us more than Wong Ayok, the Straits Times' senior food correspondent. Welcome back to Live Picks, Ayok. So what are your top recommendations?
Okay, the restaurant is called No Signboard Sheng Jian Bao. So obviously Sheng Jian Bao is a signature item. Sheng Jian Bao, like you said just now, is pan-fried buns, which are quite unusual. They come from the area around Shanghai, and the way they are prepared is they're pan-fried on a skillet. So the bottom part becomes crispy, but it's covered while it's being pan-fried. So the steam causes the top to be cooked. So on top is a steamed bun, but below is crispy. So that's the unusual thing about it. And that's the thing you should order when you eat at No Signboard Sheng Jian Bao, because the recipe there is really amazing. The dough is very soft, and the main item is called popping juices Sheng Jian Bao, and it's called that because it's so juicy inside. So when you bite into the bun, you have to be careful that the juice doesn't spurt out. If you have eaten xiao long bao, you'll know what I mean. So it's something like that. It's a minced pork filling, but very, very juicy. So that's the thing you should order. And this Sheng Jian Bao also comes in different flavors. So there's a vegetarian version, and because it's No Signboard, which is famous for its chili crab, they have a chili crab version too. So instead of minced pork, it's filled with chili crab, which is wonderful if you don't want to eat crabs because it dirties your hands, because no shells, no fingers required. So that's the thing to order. If you like xiao long bao, this eatery has xiao long bao too, and they do it pretty well too. There's also guo tie, which is like a dumpling that's pan-fried. There's another dim sum item that I like very much called deep fried radish pastry. It's just strips of pastry that's rolled and then deep fried until it's crispy. But you have other dishes as well, so it's not just eating dumplings at this eatery. They have like cold dishes, like cold shui ji, which is a spicy chicken in a Sichuan style sauce. There's also drunken chicken if you don't like spicy food. So lots to eat there, and prices are very reasonable because it's self-service. Yeah, you make an order, then you wait until your number appears on the board, then you go and collect it. Very simple, affordable, and great food.
Well, you've heard it from Ayuk, affordable and a wide array of dishes to expect. Ayuk, thank you so much for joining us today. You can find No Signboard Sheng Jian Bao on the first floor of North Point City. Lots more in the Friday pages in tomorrow's paper. You can also visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay. See you tomorrow on The Big Story.